Would Bungie accept it? After all, this was Bungie, the studio that had screamed for independence at every turn. The studio that literally fought tooth and nail to escape Microsoft. So why the pivot? Well, because the deal wasn't about growth, it was about survival. In 2023, Destiny hit yet another low with Lightfall, an expansion so poorly received, Bungie publicly apologized. "We know we have lost a lot of your trust. Destiny needs to surprise and delight. We haven't done this enough, and that's going to change." Player hours were down, revenue was 45% below projections, and the writing was on the wall. Layoffs hit, 8% of the company, over 100 people. Bonuses cut, benefits removed, even legendary composer Michael Salvatore, Marty O'Donnell's longtime creative partner, was let go. And then came the real scandal. Reports surfaced that, allegedly, Bungie had overstated its financial health before the Sony acquisition, where former workers claimed had they not been acquired, insolvency was looming. The next quote comes from a GameFile reporting. "I think Sony overpaid for Bungie," one of the former insiders said. "I think Bungie sold things they were just not able to deliver." At the same time, it was reported that Pete Parsons, the CEO, had allegedly spent over $2 million on classic cars. Which is fine, his money. But maybe not the best look when your company's collapsing and your employees are getting laid off at every turn. Bungie did have a solution to plummeting revenue though: restock the microtransaction store with one of the best cosmetics players had ever seen. Former developers would even go on to state that the leadership demanded more ways for the game to be monetized, deliberately designing less appealing armor to avoid competition in the Eververse store, prioritizing finances over creative input. It got so bad there was monetization scolding meetings for not enabling enough microtransactions. If that doesn't scream corporate rot, what does? Actually, I do have something better, the quote that summed it all up. In late 2023, with morale in freefall and layoffs still rolling, one employee shared that, quote, "It feels like many higher-ups aren't listening to the data and are like, we just need to win our fans back. They still like us. They still like us." Layoffs continued into 2024, even after the better-received Final Ship expansion, which included many reversal decisions like the sunsetting. Former General Counsel Don McCowan stated that it was good that Sony was inflicting some discipline and forcing them, Bungie, to fix things that were wrong with the game, blasting the leadership and, more curiously, their egos. But it was too late. Veterans and directors like Luke Smith were laid off, 220 people gone, and hundreds more, nearly 12%, were reassigned to other Sony studios. Some found out they were fired through Twitter, others lost their maternity leave before the weekend. How convenient. At this point, it felt like Pete Parsons and the board had played everyone, their players, their employees, even Sony, and they weren't happy, demanding more accountability. Parsons then issued a statement. He called it painful. He blamed rising dev costs, industry shifts, the economy. But the truth, Bungie had scaled too fast, over 1,000 employees at their peak, over projections, under deliveries, and players burning out, fatigued by years of predatory monetization and broken trust, all in a game that proved incredibly difficult and convoluted for new players to join. It was a recipe for disaster. Leadership was clearly the main issue, a know-all approach, inflated egos, as if they wanted it all to fail. And worst of all were the incubator projects, hundreds of millions funneled into ambitious prototypes, black holes of money with no guaranteed return, and Sony banking on their success. Because one of them wasn't just a new IP, it was a name from Bungie's past, one fans once revered, now stripped of its meaning, repurposed for a future no one asked for: Marathon. Initially, Marathon pulled huge excitement. Tens of millions watched. From the creators of Halo and Destiny comes a new sci-fi PvP extraction shooter. Marathon said at the trailer description. Extraction shooter. Okay, bold choice, but this is Marathon. This was the series that really started Bungie, the franchise that directly inspired Halo, from Master Chief to Cortana to the art style, all of it originated with Marathon. In some ways, this felt like Bungie going back to their roots. And then, April 12, 2025, gameplay reveal. This is the first time in my life I saw an actual game trailer look like a YouTube ad that I would skip while eating dinner. Concord 2 is coming along nicely, it seems.
Oh, shit.
From the visual clutter of its overly stylized art, directly contradicting everything Bungie used to stand for, simple yet effective design, to androgynous character models, to a PvP-based multiplayer-only experience, meaning no campaign. It became clear Marathon was the antithesis of everything old Bungie represented. By April 23, an alpha test, originally under NDA, only confirmed players' worst fears, quickly losing interest despite as more invites went out. The consensus, aggressively mediocre, a cobbled-together mash of watered-down mechanics seen in other extraction shooters with a bit of hero shooter DNA awkwardly spliced in, trying to blend a genre aimed at hardcore audiences into something more casual-friendly and sanitized. But that was the main issue, because extraction shooters by design cater to players who want high stakes, sweaty, tense gameplay. Marathon was offering none of that. Proximity chat, feature Bungie popularized, was absent in the name of safe environments, effectively representing what is wrong with Marathon's design approach: safe, bland, and soulless. Add in the polarizing stylized visuals, and Bungie had created a game that seemed to please no one while trying to please everyone. A textbook example of a community-based title, and a game designed for players and brands and trends only. Now, you would think Bungie was facing an uphill battle, but another mountain was about to come crashing down on top of it. Bungie has a history of lawsuits and plagiarism allegations, a very long list, and the accidental use of fan art in Destiny 2, not once, not twice, but 3 times, to a much bigger case, a plagiarism lawsuit over Destiny 2's Red War campaign, allegedly lifted from a WordPress sci-fi serial. In a bizarre twist, because Bungie had vaulted in the campaign, they couldn't provide proper evidence and had to rely on YouTube clips in court, which of course were thrown out. The case remains ongoing. And then there were the internal lawsuits. This is where things get actually insane. A $200 million lawsuit by Chris Barrett, Marathon's original game director and a former Bungie board member at Bungie for 25 years, mysteriously replaced in 2024. According to reporting and court documents, Barrett was terminated following internal allegations of inappropriate behavior involving at least 8 female employees, specifically through some very creepy DMs. But Barrett argues that he was wrongfully terminated, and that Bungie, Sony, is also revoking his founder shares upon termination, the same type of equity shares Marty O'Donnell had once fought for in court, reportedly valued at $45 million. Barrett in turn claims he was made a scapegoat, not just for Bungie's underperformance, but for much deeper misconduct inside the company. In court filings, he alleged that a still active company founder routinely made remarks such as, quote, "A woman's place is barefoot, pregnant." The lawsuit also accuses a very senior executive of attending meetings while intoxicated and engaging in sexual conduct at Bungie-sponsored events. And perhaps the most disturbing one, that one employee had repeatedly exposed himself in the office, pressing against a glass window overlooking the entire studio floor.
Alright, that's it! Now it's my turn! 5 minutes alone, that's all I need!
Barrett not only exposed himself to the world, but all of Bungie. The case remains ongoing. But for Bungie, already dealing with backlash, layoffs, and collapsing morale, this lawsuit cracked open a far uglier picture of its internal culture, one that might be even more chaotic than anyone imagined. And somehow, things were only about to get worse, at least more publicly. May 15, 2025, an artist known as Anti-Real Forward claiming that many assets shown in the marathon reveal had been directly lifted from her 2017 designs. And it wasn't subtle. In fact, it was so bad
Not
that
today, my
images
friend.
still showed the anti-real tag clearly visible inside of the game. And the kicker, Marathon's own art director actively followed Anti-Real on social media. A day later, Bungie issued a statement. They admitted to
I am indeed
again,
okay.
but tried to downplay it, avoiding official accounts, instead communicating through the dev account with only 11,000 followers, promising to conduct a review, and then came a live stream.
To our attention that an artist who worked on Marathon in the early stages of pre-production took a number of graphic elements from a graphic designer without permission or acknowledgement and placed them on a decal sheet that was then checked in 2020. The decal sheet included icons and text elements. These elements ended up in our alpha build, and there's absolutely no excuse for this oversight.
The stream chat took to calling Marathon art raiders, spamming plagiarism will make me god, quoting Durandal's the villain from the original Marathon, the face of a company in ruins. But despite all the backlash, Sony remains adamant. Marathon will launch before April 2026, even after officially announcing an indefinite delay, a delay that developers were even unaware of. In their words, they are doubling down on the original Marathon universe, promising tougher difficulty and the return of proximity chat. Improvements directly from feedback, but as Destiny showed us time and time again, will they be enough to save it? While on the Sony side, they are still doubling down on its live service strategy, vowing not to repeat the Concord mistake, a promise that feels almost guaranteed to age like milk left out in the sun. Inside Bungie itself, morale had been crumbling since 2023 layoffs. Remember, Marathon's development was through all of that, and now with a pending disaster, morale was in freefall. Bungie spent the last decade taking all the classic corporate out-of-touch textbook greedy boxes, and now they were trend chasing, pouring millions into perhaps the worst possible genre they could have chosen, extraction shooters, a genre they would never be able to recoup the alleged $300 million budget Marathon has cost to produce.
You can only really be innovative when you do stuff that's crazy and you take risks and you do things wrong. I really believe that if you're doing something you feel comfortable doing something that's safe, that you are sure is going to work out perfectly, you're not really going to do anything very interesting.
But here's the thing to conclude this story. Making games is an incredibly difficult task, and Bungie always had a leadership problem, especially after Alex Seropian's departure. Just have to look at Halo 2, buried in mismanagement, and from there, nearly every single title they have produced was built through development hell and crunch. For years, it was easy for fans to point fingers. First Microsoft, then Activision, but then Bungie went independent and then sold off to Sony. The excuses ran out. Fans were disillusioned, and this time, they blamed Bungie itself, the publisher, because those issues weren't just external, but also internal. Pete Parsons, the corporate plant, would say, still Bungie's CEO, still making the calls, still not stepping aside. A simple, clear, identifiable issue. The man you can attribute the studio's recent direction, especially post-Destiny 2, and the incubation projects, and of course, the layoffs. But the issue never was just Pete Parsons, and the reality seems far more complicated than just one bad guy or just one bad studio or a bad publisher. Over the years, Bungie's board and other creative leads underwent many shakeups, especially during the Sony acquisition. But there's two names that always stayed the same: Pete Parsons and the elusive Jason Jones. Quiet, reserved, always in the background. once a powerful voice at Bungie, and one key figure behind the studio's ambitious and catastrophic incubation projects, like Marathon. According to Paul Tassi at Forbes, developers warned the leadership for years about the lack of PvE in Marathon, the exact same kind of communication problem that crippled Destiny and even Halo. Marathon 2 went through its own development hell, and just like Destiny, concerns were ignored. Tassi also reports that Marathon was originally pitched to the leadership in 2020, well before the Sony acquisition, as a PvP-only extraction shooter inspired by Tarkov, pitched by, as he put it, a good old boy in Bungie's leadership, and who so happens to be Chief Creative Officer in 2020 and front-running incubation projects, Jason Jones. The same Jason Jones who has long been known to clash creatively since the creation of Destiny. The same Jason Jones who in 2021 became Chief Vision Officer, tasked with, quote, help Bungie's top creative leadership unlock their full potential at the company. Now, was it Jones who pitched Marathon? We don't know. Maybe it could have been someone else, like Chris Barrett, the original director of Marathon, another longtime Bungie lead, another good old boy, the one that perhaps didn't listen to those concerns. And after his exit, Joe Ziegler, the former Valorant director, stepped in, under the supervision of Jason Jones. But regardless of who did what, here's the facts that matter. Those leaders with massive bloated egos, the board, for more than a decade, exploited their developers, exploited their players, and exploited Bungie's name until it meant almost nothing, completely blind to their own flaws. From the communication breakdowns to the lack of clear creative direction, even the repeated art plagiarisms and all the misconducts and the internal culture, all of it stems from one place: leadership. Their decisions, their lack of oversight, their arrogance. Leadership matters. They play a very critical role. They steer the ship, settle disputes, and point developers in a unified direction. And the devs under them, the most talented that we attribute to the creation of Destiny and Halo, many of them left because no matter how talented you are, you can't outrun bad management forever, especially as projects and the studio grew larger and more complex. And that was Bungie's final blow. The bigger they got, the worse it became. Today, the Bungie that exists, it's not Bungie anymore. It's the classic Ship of Theseus paradox. Replacing of pieces and eventually what remains is something else entirely. A tragic ending for a studio that once overflowed with ideas, talent, and heart, and now Marathon is the final straw, the last kick before death. A project so mismanaged, so out of touch, it's the perfect culmination of what Bungie has become: an empty logo. But I want to leave you with this: no matter who you blame, this is the story of a company that desperately wanted to become AAA, or rather, quadruple A.
The world's greatest arcade video game from the Atari 7800. More games at about half the price.
It's 1986. Five brothers with a computer hardware and software distribution business in Brittany, France, decided to take a swing at a brand new industry. They are not coders, they are not tech wizards, they're just a family with a knack for spotting opportunities. Their names, the Guillemets, and the man leading the charge, Yves Guillemot. This is where Ubisoft as we know it begins, not with a bang, but with a realization. The video game market is growing fast, and they went in. Ubisoft's first release, Zombie, wasn't a masterpiece. It was a clunky survival game that barely made a ripple, selling just over 5,000 copies. But it didn't need to. For Yves, it was proof that Ubisoft could crack the gaming market. And so they did. By 1995, Ubisoft had its first real breakout. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, and for Ubisoft, enter Rayman, a quirky, limbless little hero dreamed up by a young Michel Hansel.
Rayman is a brutally unforgiving platformer with a minuscule amount of lives compared to the skill level expected of you. It's an incredibly well designed game, creating one of the most engaging platforming experiences.
Bright, bold, and brimming with charm, Rayman wasn't just a hit, it was a signal. Ubisoft wasn't content to stay small. They were chasing something bigger, much bigger. Eve had a vision: AAA gaming, blockbusters, global domination. So by 1996, Ubisoft went public. With an $80 million cash injection, they expanded aggressively, opening studios across the world. But there was a problem. Despite having a growing list of published titles, Ubisoft lacked major in-house franchises. Outside of Rayman and its stellar sequel, The Great Escape, they didn't have a true blockbuster, especially one that could break the American market. The gamers, however, were always thinking ahead. They didn't just anticipate the rise of video games, they foresaw something even bigger: mobile gaming and free-to-play monetization. In 1991, as internet's first hero, Michel and Gerard, two other brothers, founded a mobile and free-to-play gaming company. In its early days, Gameloft specialized in mobile Java-based adaptations of popular titles for devices like the Nokia N-Gage. Some of those titles would go on to be licensed from Ubisoft, allowing both companies to generate revenue from the same IPs. And it paid off. That same year, Ubisoft's stock went up five-fold, and with an extra $170 million to work with, they were acquiring studios, snatching up ideas, and transforming into a true FPS powerhouse. And so, it's a golden age hit. From the Prince of Persia Sands of Time trilogy to Splinter Cell and Chaos Theory, and from the many Ghost Recons to the many Rainbow Sixes, game after game, year after year, Ubisoft was on fire. Their titles were polished, highly rated, and commercially successful, with many still considered some of the greatest games of all time. They had mastered their niches, and they were selling millions. But not everything was smooth sailing. Michel Ansel's new IP, Good and Evil, in 2003, was loved by critics and fans, but a commercial disaster. It was Ubisoft's first major flop, yet it cemented their reputation as a company willing to take creative risks. Alan Core, Ubisoft's managing director, had this to say about taking risks. If you don't do risks, you don't exist. Apart from Electronic Arts, who are not taking risks because they can afford not. If you have a brand, you can live on the brands you have and do the minimum job. It will sell a certain amount, but damage the franchise, and sales will fall. Behind the scenes, however, Ubisoft and Gameloft partnership continued, licensing the now vastly popular IPs like Splinter Cell and Control. Effectively, Ubisoft was dominating the high-end gaming market, PC, consoles, while Gameloft cornered the emerging mobile space, squeezing revenue from every possible angle through licensing fees. All the while, both companies remained within the family. It was a brilliant plan, and almost no one noticed. For now, Ubisoft's reputation was bulletproof. They weren't the biggest fish in the pond, not yet, but they would soon roll the dice on something that would change everything. Assassin's Creed 2007. This was the gamble, a brand new IP, untested and overly ambitious. Originally conceived as a Prince of Persia sequel, it evolved into something bolder, a clash between assassins and Templars, blending Ubisoft's strengths, stealth, platforming, and the new open-world exploration. Its biggest innovation? Parkour. As Altair, if you could see it, you could climb it. But the game wasn't perfect.
The first half of Assassin's Creed is a truly clairvoyant experience. You've never played anything like it. The sagacious story, incalculable crowd interaction, and unprecedented freedom to traverse the environment how you choose are landmark moments. Over time, repetition rears its ugly head. Combat becomes a necessary routine, and dim-witted foes snatch you out of the Third Crusade and remind you that you're playing a game. The potential here is undeniable, but there's been some dust swept under the rug that places a blemish on an otherwise beautiful piece of art.
Assassin's Creed was a template that just needed refinement, and it was also effortlessly marketable. The rich, realistic setting, almost one-for-one crafted cities, hooded assassins, hidden blades, huge NPC population for the time, leaps of faith into bales of hay. It was badass and revolutionary, and the players loved it. By 2009, Assassin's Creed had shattered expectations, selling over 8 million copies. And with its animus-driven setup, diving into the memories of long-lost ancestors, Ubisoft had something more than just a hit. They had a franchise. And if there was one thing Ubisoft knew how to do well, it was franchises.
My name is Ezio Auditore da Firenze. Like my father before me, I am an assassin.
2009, Assassin's Creed 2. This wasn't a prototype anymore. This was near perfection. Ezio, the smirking, charismatic Renaissance assassin, took everything Altair fumbled and made it better. Smoother parkour, more immersive cities, built to perfection to its real counterparts, a gripping story and writing. But more than that, Assassin's Creed 2 was a true beginning of Ubisoft's signature open-world formula. A large sprawling map, landmarks to climb to uncover the said map, and a world filled with a litany of side quest markers and completionist-oriented objectives like chests to open, feathers or pages to collect to keep players engaged as they parkoured throughout the city, turning Assassin's Creed 2 not just into a hit, but also an influential title, selling over 10 million copies and cementing itself as one of the best in the franchise. Ubisoft had perfected the formula, but at the same time, they also made their first major misstep. With Assassin's Creed 2 on PC released a few months later in 2010, Ubisoft introduced Uplay, a service meant to unify all their games and in time cut out Steam entirely and optimize their revenue.
Uplay is designed to enhance your experience with the Ubisoft games you love to play. From accomplishments within the game to the way you share those accomplishments with the world. Uplay will reward you for doing what you already do.
But with Uplay came something far more controversial, always on DRM. No internet, no game. Connection drops, progress is wiped. Forums exploded with outrage. Boycotts started. Boycotters screamed, don't buy it or pirate it. Then disaster struck. On launch weekend, Ubisoft servers were DDoS attacked, leaving thousands unable to play for 6 hours. Then it happened again. The complaints poured in. Login failures, crashes, negative reviews. I've had this game for a few days now, but I haven't been able to play it for more than an hour at a time yet because of the permanent internet connection that is required to play the game. Sometimes it is my provider having issues, and sometimes it is Ubisoft telling me that my username and password is not correct. This is just not acceptable. The worst part? Ubisoft openly admitted they would only remove the DRM if it was cracked. And so, within a month, hackers hacked Uplay and soon released a fully bypassed version, removing the always online requirement entirely. By December 2010, they softened the DRM, requiring only a one-time activation, but it took them 2 years to remove it completely. But the message was clear. Ubisoft chose to prioritize their profits and protect their IP, which was completely legitimate, mind you. But maybe they didn't have the best intentions in mind when it came to their consumers. And this was just the beginning. The Despite the growing anti-consumer sentiment, which to be fair was limited to PC users, Ubisoft had found their golden goose, and they weren't about to let it go. With the success of Assassin's Creed 2, they launched Brotherhood and Revelations, completing Ezio's amazing saga. Same formula, different cities, minor gameplay additions. But there was something impressive. They were releasing these games every single year, on top of their other franchises. Brotherhood and Revelations each went on to sell over 7 million copies. Ubisoft had hit peak AAA status, rivaling EA and Activision's yearly releases. We are challenging EA and Activision, certainly, if we keep our focus on delivering high-quality games and on attracting and retaining top talent, I'm confident we'll reach that goal of becoming number one. On top of that, remember Gameloft? By 2008, the increasing use of smartphones changed absolutely everything. The rise of app stores made digital purchases easier than ever, and Gameloft pivoted. They stopped relying on Ubisoft's brands and instead developed their own. Asphalt, Modern Combat, Dungeon Hunter, Gangstar, Crime City, many were thinly disguised clones of major franchises, but they thrived, selling over 200 million copies by 2009, and with them came something far more lucrative: microtransactions, time savers, in-game currency, pay-to-win mechanics, monetization designed to keep players spending. At the time, the broader gaming industry was starting to experiment with these tactics, but Ubisoft, they were paying very close attention.
Our first motivation was to work with great people and have fun. 25 years later, we've been able to ship more than 500 million games and entertain millions. Not bad for a company which first product had no arms and no legs. So I want to thank all of you for your support over the years.
Meanwhile, their empire was growing at an incredible pace. By 2013, Ubisoft's workforce had exploded to over 5,000 employees, with Ubisoft Montreal alone nearing 3,000 employees, making it the biggest gaming studio in the world. But success breeds confidence, confidence breeds complacency, and for Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed soon wouldn't be just a franchise anymore, but the foundation of their empire, one they would soon rely on far too heavily. Worse, another element arose: greed.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change.
A year later, in 2012, Ubisoft didn't just release another Assassin's Creed and Ghost Recon, they also launched a new entry in the Far Cry franchise. And Vaas' infamous definition of insanity would end up being quite poetic for Ubisoft's trajectory going forward. Far Cry 3 featured a captivating villain that instantly hooked players: Vaas. It offered a massive open-world playground with satisfying gunplay and stealth mechanics. In many ways, it felt like an Assassin's Creed FPS, in ways more than one: climbing towers, clearing out enemy outposts, and a heavy emphasis on side activities like hunting, gathering, and crafting, tying themselves partially to your character progression. These were all hallmarks of the so-called Ubisoft formula, echoing in Assassin's Creed 3 that same year. Far Cry 3 went on to sell over 10 million copies, vastly outperforming its more unique predecessor, Far Cry 2. And despite its similarities to Assassin's Creed, fans embraced it. For the time, it still felt new, enough, and most importantly, fun. But then we got Far Cry 4 2 years later. New villain, new location, but the exact same gameplay loop. Still Then Far Cry Primal dropped in 2016, and despite being set in the Stone Age, players quickly realized it was not only the same game with the same gameplay loop, but the same map layout as Far Cry 4. The formula had become a meme. Still, Primal sold well enough. Ubisoft had secured yet another reliable franchise for easy revenue. But while Far Cry the real sides of Ubisoft's franchise, Assassin's Creed. Although the sentiment over Assassin's Creed 3 has improved over the years, its initial reception back in 2012 wasn't entirely positive. This is not a bad game, however, it's not the epic we thought it would be. Ubisoft claims it would be 80% a new IP, but it really is just more of the same old, same old. There's a lot to do. Just don't go into it thinking of something grounded. It's AC, but in America. Still, through that lukewarm reception, AC3 was also criticized for its technical issues and bugs, and for the first time, fans started to express concern about the franchise's increasingly demanding annual release cycle.
However, I felt like the last 5-10% of this game was just like all wrapped up, and I really think they ran out of time and they wanted to get this game out by the holidays. Wrap up the story, wrap up everything. There are still glitches and bugs in the game. Doesn't matter. The holiday season sticks around for nobody. Wrap the game up. So some of the glitches and bugs weren't worked out, and the game just ended.
But when Yves Guillemot was asked whether too many releases were diluting the brand, his response was simple. They are necessary to satisfy demand. And he wasn't wrong. Despite everything, Assassin's Creed 3 was the best-selling AC game at the time, moving over 12 million copies. But something else was creeping in, something that would completely reshape Ubisoft's future. With the rise of online, multiplayer had first been introduced in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. AC3 was no different, featuring a multiplayer mode with a progression system. And this is where we saw it for the first time, a paid shortcut, allowing players to buy upgrades with Eruditos credits.
This time around, they allow you to ability a lot of this unlocking process with this, the Eruditos credit system, which allows you to buy Eruditos credits from it. And then you can unlock any skill or ability, I believe, below level 50 utilizing this.
But it was fine, right? It was just optional. Just don't use it, just don't buy it, right?
Some core mechanics could still be improved. Black Flag's story, world, and systems come together to form a markedly better and more cohesive game than Assassin's Creed 3.
Black Flag delivers a world brimming with gorgeous places to go, amazing secrets to discover, and nefarious pirates to stab.
If there was ever a question that Assassin's Creed needed something ambitious to get the series back on track, Black Flag is that game and then some.
In 2013, Ubisoft fully embraced the Assassin's Creed 3 naval battles, and players loved it. To many, Black Flag was the last great Assassin's Creed game. It still had a Ubisoft open world formula, but sailing across the Caribbean, raiding enemy ships, and managing your own ship made it fresh and exciting. Beneath the surface, something else was creeping in. Following in AC3's footsteps, Black Flag introduced something new, this time to its single-player campaign.
Final upgrades on the ship definitely feel a little too grindy, except, look, conveniently, Ubisoft will sell you a DLC pack to unlock those pesky upgrade plans automatically.
Time-saving boosters, pay-to-skip mechanics, the start of something much bigger. And it must have worked, because just a year later, Ubisoft doubled down. Unity launched in 2014 with even more microtransactions, time-saver packs, map reveals, revealing the location of its many side activities through Helix credits. Why? Well, according to a Ubisoft VP, quote, Ubisoft has come to recognize that some players have more money than time. This wasn't a design flaw, it was a business model. Of course, Ubisoft wasn't alone. EA had done the same thing with Dead Space 3 just a year prior, shamelessly offering upgrades through the in-game upgrade bench. But Ubisoft was different. They had introduced microtransactions, so carefully and gradually that hardly anyone took back. But some voices clearly stated the issue.
I said it for Dead Space 3, and I'll say it again for any other game that tries to pull this nonsense. I cannot trust you not to mess with the in-game resource system if the temptation of pushing microtransactions on the players is there. I can't trust you to do that. I have no idea what you did to the pacing of the progression and the gathering of the various in-game currencies because you decided to muddy the water with microtransactions, so I cannot trust you.
And to make the deal even sweeter, Assassin's Creed Unity launched in an absolutely broken state. Game-breaking bugs, nightmarish facial glitches, terrible performance. For many, the game was unplayable. It's Assassin's Creed with lots of bugs, a shocking frame rate, and microtransactions of up to $100. Enjoy. Another game pushed the market before it was ready for release. Keep up the good work, Ubisoft. You'll be taking away EA's golden turd in no time at this rate. And yet, despite it all, it still sold over 10 million copies. Ubisoft then provided the first DLC for free or Season Pass holders with a free game as an apology to its terrible launch, with users saying, "Fuck, I should have bought the Season Pass. Yeah, I'm feeling blown. I don't suppose I could buy it now and still get Far Cry 4 for free." So in 2015, Ubisoft did it again. Assassin's Creed Syndicate was better polished than Unity, with 2 playable protagonists, a new grappling hook, but it was more of the same. And for the first time in a franchise, just like in Primal, the sales suffered. With Unity's disastrous launch fresh in players' minds, Syndicate sold just 5 million copies, half of what Unity had done. For the first time in years, there was no Assassin's Creed game in 2016. Instead, they promised to step back and re-examine the franchise. And as Ubisoft hits the brakes, all 3 original creators, Jade Raymond, Corey May, and Patrice Desilets, had progressively been leaving the company. The minds that built Assassin's Creed were now gone. At this point, many players were checking out of Ubisoft games entirely. The formula was predictable, and the phrase "if you played one, you played them all" became more common. But humans still loved the gameplay, be the slow progression, the map clearing, endless side content. It was addictive. It was like comfort food. You knew exactly what to expect. And on top of that, the marketing was always compelling. A new historical or unique setting, or a new massive open world. It was enough to keep players intrigued. But there was a limit, and Ubisoft was dangerously close to hitting it. Or were they really? Because while all of this was happening back in 2012, they had taken another gamble, one that would stain their trust forever. In 2012, Ubisoft unveiled Watch Dogs, their answer to Grand Theft Auto, but with a hacker twist. A glimpse at the future with the first game demo video of Watch Dogs, said the description. With all their resources, all their talent, maybe this could be true. The first gameplay demo stunned gamers. The visuals were breathtaking, the animations lifelike, and the idea of hacking an entire city at your fingertips, it was revolutionary. Hype skyrocketed. Millions watched in awe. It became one of Ubisoft's most pre-ordered games ever. But it was all a lie. When Watch Dogs finally launched in 2014, it was aggressively mediocre. Forums exploded with side-by-side comparisons, proving just how much had been changed. Ubisoft denied any downgrade, but reality said otherwise. And as if that wasn't enough, Ubisoft's infamous Uplay service, forced onto all their games, was completely broken at launch. Again. Yet, despite everything, Watch Dogs still sold over 10 million copies. But something had changed. Some gamers no longer trusted Ubisoft's promises. They had seen behind the curtain, but Ubisoft, they had already figured out how to keep the hype machine running.
No one saw, wanted to see. People turn away from it. They run from it if they can.
The Division, a gripping cinematic trailer, a chilling outbreak consuming New York, and then a gameplay trailer, carefully orchestrated, stage voiceovers, strategic camera angles, and the cherry on top, the closing door animation. The internet lost its mind. Ubisoft had figured out the formula: a beautiful CGI trailer, a perfect vertical slice of gameplay, a promise. But when The Division launched in 2016, a disappointment for many, comments flooded in. I actually prefer watching this video than playing the game. But Ubisoft couldn't resist another cash grab. The game felt incomplete. It was a grindy looter shooter, but without a compelling endgame, with the rest of the content locked behind a season pass and DLC. Then came the microtransaction store, despite assurances from game director Magnus Jensen, who explicitly said, "You cannot spend a little bit of money and fast track to get better gear or pay to win or vanity items. We do not have that." A few patches later, a premium vendor appeared, selling those same vanity items for real money. And yet, it shattered records. The best-selling Ubisoft game at launch, surpassing Watch Dogs. Over 20 million copies were sold. And finally, Rainbow Six Siege. Beautifully marketed trailer, a return to the tactical shooter franchise after 6 long years, which, while becoming one of the most successful live service projects, originally launched to mediocre reviews and of course, egregious microtransactions, but improving with time, retaining and growing a steady player base for a unique multiplayer experience. But by this point, the cycle of overhyped promises, copy-paste design, and under-delivering, coupled with years of aggressive monetization, was about to spell their doom, even as they dove down further on live services and microtransactions. With the return of a giant, Ubisoft was about to test just how far players and their wallets could be pushed. Assassin's Creed Origins.
They are the first to call themselves the Assassins.
Ubisoft's Montreal's goal was to modernize Assassin's Creed, to lift the series out of the pit that Unity and Syndicate left it in. Inspired by the massive success of The Witcher 3, Assassin's Creed transformed into an RPG-light experience. The combat was reworked into an action-heavy system. RPG staples like gear, stats, skill trees, and level progression were added, alongside a bigger emphasis on open-world exploration. But the gamble paid off. Origins was a massive success, selling over 10 million copies and bringing both old and new fans into the fold. However, a number of fans voiced concerns over the dilution of the identity of the franchise, calling it Assassin's Creed in name only, not just because of the introduction of the RPG elements, but the increasing focus on its mythological fantasy side, plus the age-old criticism, an even more bloated open world, repetitive side content, and an exhausting gameplay.
There's a lot of give and take here and a lot of changes, but one thing absolutely hampered my enjoyment. It's the repetition. Now, it's not based on the collectibles, but it's continued on the Club Med-like enemies, the settlements and the guardhouses that positively choke the environment, with each offering a kill the captain and find some treasure kind of shakedown list, and it continues over and over and over.
And then there was the monetization. By this point, Ubisoft's aggressive pricing models were expected. Tables with multiple editions, time-saver packs, cosmetics and maps to reveal in-game secrets. It was interesting. The more time-saving microtransactions that they added, the more bloated the game became. But Origins introduced something else. Hacka chests.
But it's also important to not mince words words here, the game does technically allow players to pay for loot boxes or gamble for random rewards. Regardless of how unobtrusive or optional they may seem, it's important to acknowledge that paid loot boxes are still there in some form so that those with addictive tendencies can be wary.
Loot boxes, the industry's most controversial trend, had officially crept its way into Assassin's Creed. Now players didn't just have the option to pay to save time, they could pay for power. While technically avoidable as their other MTX, as currency was obtained in-game, the introduction of loot boxes through viable currency raised the previous critical concern. Could Ubisoft really still be trusted to design their games without microtransactions influencing progression and game design? But instead of pulling further back, Ubisoft tripled down. When Assassin's Creed Odyssey launched just a year later, it expanded on Origin's RPG formula, introducing an even larger map, more side activities, and a deeper upgradable gear system. But for some players, it felt excessive, bloated to the point of being deliberately grindy, designed to nudge those with more money than time towards microtransactions, and Ubisoft knew it. When Odyssey launched, some time-saver microtransactions were completely absent for the first month. Later, they even adjusted XP gains from side activities, subtly admitting that the default progression was grindier than it was meant to be. At this point, these tactics weren't just limited to Assassin's Creed, they were spreading everywhere. It became clear with the successes of Origins and Odyssey that mainstream players were engaging heavily with Ubisoft's approach to microtransactions. So much so that for the first time, their microtransaction revenues surpassed the digital sales of actual games. So of course, they were not gonna stop. In 2018, Ubisoft expanded that model into the Far Cry franchise. Far Cry 5 and then New Dawn featured cosmetics, time savers, and even weapons available for purchase. And again, it worked. Far Cry 5 went on to sell millions of copies, becoming the best-selling entry in the series. Then there was For Honor, a bold new IP and a great concept that barely functioned at launch.
Shit netcode, crappy matchmaking, and worst of all, using peer-to-peer connections, all under fucking Uplay. It is infuriating.
On top of bugs and safety issues, the game was aggressively monetized. Gamers quickly crunched the numbers and discovered that unlocking everything available would cost over $732, or more than 2.5 years of playtime. Ubisoft did respond directly to this claim with this.
We never had an intention for you to unlock everything in the game.
Keep in mind, this was a full-priced game from $60 to $90. Ultimately, much like Rainbow Six Siege, For Honor received post-launch support, and with time, balance changes, and dedicated servers a year later gave the game a second wind, at least for a little while. This monetization philosophy carried into Ghost Recon Wildlands, Ubisoft's open-world reinvention of the tactical shooter series, and of course, it came with loot boxes. Despite mixed reception, Wildlands became surprisingly popular, reaching over 15 million players. But it was its sequel, Breakpoint, that would poetically and finally break Ubisoft. Breakpoint in 2019 completely abandoned the Ghost Recon's identity of being a single-player tactical military sim to add some looter shooter elements that could be monetized with XP boosters, time saver packs, loot boxes, and microtransactions galore.
People say it feels like a game with no unifying vision, but I disagree with you. I think there is a unifying vision, and that vision is monetization. When you view the game through the lens of monetization, all of its weird, confused, out-of-place choices make absolute sense. I think the social hub exists so that players feel pressure to buy cosmetics and
quotes with microtransactions. I think the shoehorned RPG mechanics exist because they can so easily be monetized, allowing people to purchase upgrades they want instead of grinding for them, which is exactly how it worked in Far Cry New Dawn and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, by the way. I think the banal daily and weekly missions exist to keep people playing for longer so they can be monetized. I was barely able to craft anything after 6 or 7 hours of play, and I think that stingy economy tuning exists so that it can be monetized.
We had reached a point where monetization was no longer subtle. It was clearly influencing game design, and to its greatest detriment across Ubisoft games. Despite all of this, Yves Guillemot defended Breakpoint's microtransactions, claiming they were entirely optional, just like in all their other games. He even suggested that the store's design was inspired by the successful monetization model of Wildlands, effectively blaming the players for its existence. And to be fair, he wasn't entirely wrong, but Ubisoft wasn't done yet. Not only some microtransactions had to be removed due to backlash, in 2021, Ubisoft pushed even further into predatory practices by jumping on the NFT bandwagon for Breakpoint. Ubisoft Quartz, a service for buying in-game cosmetics as NFTs, was overwhelmingly hated by players. Even Ubisoft employees spoke out against it. In the end, the market rejected the idea entirely. The trade volume was nearly non-existent, and after less than a year, Ubisoft quietly shut down Quartz and its respective Digit NFTs, pretending it never happened. Despite all the controversies and backlash up until this point, Ubisoft was making a lot of money. From 2015 to 2018, during the height of microtransactions, amping up general monetization, bloated worlds, broken promises, and broken games, Ubisoft's stock price skyrocketed, going from 15 euros per share to 100 euros per share. So why would a Ubisoft stop? Why would they change anything? So they kept going and going. At the end of the day, making money is a business job that is acceptable and it is expected. That's why the Guillemots got into the gaming industry in the first place. But when you keep churning out the same